So it is my great pleasure to be here today for Carrie Crane's geometry lessons and Michelle Lugi's souvenirs and castaways. These shows have nothing to do with one another. They are unique, completely separate entities. And yet for audiences, and I think you're one of them, who love close looking, layered thinking, and creative connections, there are some amazing synchronicities to be found. I'm so glad Carrie and Michelle are exhibiting together, and here's why. Created by artists who tinker and play in the most hopeful of ways, these shows explore basic building blocks that all coalesce around a greater purpose, and if we're lucky, perhaps even a search for humanity-saving truths. By configuring platonic solids in novel ways and busting open their symmetry, their seams and their sides, Carrie may just reveal some hidden, as yet unknowable logic about our complicated universe. She presents us with stunning spirograph-like works on paper, non-objective drawings, and painting combinations that smack of constructivism and suprematism, but that are instead individual homages to the beauty and mystery contained within a cube, an icosahedron, a dodecahedron, an octahedron. They are filled with exquisite and unexpected patterns that are decorative and yet deliberate, and completely derived from excised fragments of the original Platonic forms. Inspired by the new shapes these drawings laid bare, Carrie ventured into the third dimension. Some of her sculptures are direct echoes of these drafted outlines. Some provide portals to the formerly unseen interior spaces of these solids, and yet all are their own kind of wondrous futuristic architecture, complete with color bursts, reflective surfaces, shapes within shapes, and Escher-like drawings that challenge our perception of reality, illusion, and the ways that curves and angles relate to one another. To my excited eyes, they also have a little bit of the alien in them, I think. Whereas Carrie has chosen to muck about with visual structures of ancient philosophy and mathematics, Michelle presents us with a kind of environmentally oriented Dada for the 21st century. Simultaneously straddling hope and futility, Michelle consistently finds witty new ways to expose and lament the ubiquity of plastic in our midst. In this exhibition, she offers us delightfully absurd attempts to preserve and protect a library of present-day natural specimen. Feathers, pine cones, shells, and seeds are cleverly matched with and then encased by repurposed plastic packaging, birch bark backgrounds, and frames of crocheted plarn. These are contemporary souvenirs, treasures, and relics, displayed in a way that conjures connections to Renaissance cabinets of curiosities. Michelle's curios, however, serve to reinforce the fact that no matter how lovingly we choose to package, market, and arrange our natural world, we are suffocating it with plastic. There will be a point at which these organic things are no longer available in our environment. This notion is driven home still further by the pods and sticks that are irrationally wrapped and bandaged in heel and seal, traditional cloth onesies that are instead fabricated from ghost-like post-consumer plastic, and photographs in which plastic bottles serve as portholes through which to view the world around us. Plastic is quite literally framing our perspective as it hastens our extinction. These artists know that we are living in some strange and terrifying times, and the rest of us know that art can be an antidote or a call to action about much of what ails us. Thank goodness artists like Carrie and Michelle have what the latter might refer to as break glass in case of emergency sensibilities. They are disruptors who are bold enough to make Plato's perfect polyhedra embrace a bit of chaos, just to see what might happen, or offer up uncannily packaged natural artifacts for sale to jolt us out of our complacency. We can only hope that their disruptions may well unlock a secret that saves us all. But enough of my introduction. It's time to hear from the artists themselves. So here we go. So I'm going to share the mic with Carrie now. And again, to kind of extrapolate from and elaborate on her artist statement, I was hoping that you could, well, basically, my first question has to do with the forms themselves. Why these shapes? what attracted you to them, and do you have a favorite?
Oh. Why these shapes? The appeal of the shapes is that there are only 5 of them. They have to contain these particular qualities, which are that the length of the side, the size of the side, and the angle of the side is equal on all sides. And the sides come together, the same number of sides come together at every point. So if you think about this as a cube, you have squares. We all know they're all equal sides, and they all have right angles on the corners. And in a cube, 3 sides come together at every corner. So that same law is the same for all 5 of these shapes. There are only 5 possible shapes that can be made this way. And that, I just think, is kind of cool.
Absolutely. So. Yeah. And do you have a favorite? And the reason I ask this is because, shout out to my little kindergartner, who at the end of the year was learning how to distinguish between 2D and 3D shapes, and would come home from school for a week and ask me what my favorite 3D shape was. So there you go.
Passing it forward.
Yeah.
I think the octahedron is my favorite, which is 2 4-sided triangles butt to butt. There's some in here somewhere. I'm not sure why, but I like them all.
Yeah.
The cube is cool too, but it's kind of, normal.
Square.
Square, exactly.
Yeah. So, I should say that in the lead up to these exhibitions, both of these artists were very gracious and had me over to their studios. So I've had a lot of time to think about this, and I've seen some of the work in progress too. And one of the things that I think is really interesting to ask both artists that you may be burning to know about too is, in Carrie's case, can you speak a little bit more directly to how the drawings came to be, how all of the different shapes and patterns in the drawings evolved, and then in turn, how some of them relate very directly to your sculptures?
Okay, that's a big question. Well, I got intrigued by these platonic solids. I started drawing them, and there are certain ways that you can draw a 3-dimensional looking object, particularly a platonic solid, using a grid of overlapping circles. You get your compass, and you draw your circle. You put your compass point on the edge of the circle, and you draw again, and then you use those 2 points where it crosses the circle as your next points, and you make this big grid. And there are certain points within that grid that you draw together, and you can make what looks like a 3-dimensional cube or a 3-dimensional, any of these shapes. And so without having any intention of doing any of this, I just started drawing, just for the fun of it. And then as soon as I started drawing them, I started thinking, well, what if I just mess this up and, eliminate the side and flop it over and be able to look inside the box or the cube and put a different shape inside the cube, but always using the points on the grid to anchor all of the objects in the painting, which is, I think, why they're somewhat chaotic and energy-filled, but they all land somewhere in this grid, which makes them a little more, I don't know, structured. Yeah, solid, easier to handle. And the colors and patterns, well, some of the patterns come directly from the overlapping circles, and it goes to that. The stripes that you see in a lot of paintings, I guess I just like them. And they add energy or something to the work. Each of the paintings has at least one element or 2 that are drawn with graphite and in 3 dimension. So there's this a little bit of illusion of 3-dimensionality in the drawing, and the rest are mostly flat, painted spaces.
Yeah.
Did I do it?
You did it, and you absolutely did it beautifully. And I'm gonna meet you, if you don't mind, point out, just because I found this to be so clever and fun when I saw it in your studio, that sculpture right there has a direct correlation to a drawing, right?
Yes, it does.
And people might not have picked up on this because the orientation is different.
This, turned this way, is that.
So,
And that happens in and around. You can play a game, try and find where the shape came from.
great. So, one of the things we talked about in your studio too was the paper that you used, and that paper might not have been your first choice for a sculptural medium. So, so my question is basically about fabrication, and you mentioned that a little bit in your artist statement. So I wondered if you could elaborate on that, and then also how that relates to some of the rule breaking you're trying to do.
When I set out for this, I knew I had the show, I knew I had the space, I had this grand idea of making something really big that would have been made out of plywood and plexiglass and who knows what all. And I made a small model of it and panicked for quite a while about how I was going to build this, how I was going to allow for creativity and spontaneity in the process if I was having all these pieces cut by a fabricator, and what if I wanted to change the angle a little bit. Anyway, I finally just jettisoned. There were a million reasons that was a bad idea. So I finally woke up one morning and I went, that's it. I'm not, after many nights of bad sleep, I'm not going that direction. I like making the model. That was really fun. So I'm just gonna make a bunch of models. Then I started Googling architectural models and materials and looking for just the right material. And ultimately, I landed on this paper, which is very stable, is really nice to draw on, and moves up beautifully and takes paint beautifully. And it was no turning back at that point. And I stretched it as, I would say, that is as big as I could go with the paper and have it maintain its rigidity without warping. And then I built this thing and I'm thinking, why am I building this out of paper? Why isn't that made out of wood like a normal builder would make? But there was something about the challenge of being, it was just really nice to work with and allowed for unlimited, adjustments and creative changes and things like that. So,
cool. So now I'd like to pick up on a little bit on some quotes that I have from you from our studio visit. No, they're fabulous. They're fabulous. So I loved these, and this is why I want to share them with everyone else. In the visit, at various points, you said that you, quote, believe in the hidden knowledge waiting to be found in our lives, and that you, quote, hope to help crack open those truths that have yet to be unlocked. So I wondered if you wanted to say any more about that, or if you could leave them as they are.
Yeah, well, it's kind of a, little...
It's not.
I mean, one of the reasons I say in the statement, these platonic solids belong to a very rigid system, and my immediate, once I learn what they're like and what their laws are, I just have this immediate need to break it apart. And my justification for that is that, well, if no one breaks it apart, we're never going to discover what it is that might be hidden in there. I mean, it's a little lofty for me to think that I'm actually going to discover anything. But, why not?
That's how discoveries are made. Yeah. It's not by the people who think they're going to do it. It's by the people who, are humble about it.
Anyways, that's fine.
And so I just wanted to share an observation about this, that when I was thinking about these solids, they're so angular, they're so rigid, and that yet when in your play with them, there's so much softness to be found too, and roundness. And I wondered if in the course of your creating these, and the answer here can be no, and that's fine, But I wondered if this marriage of hard and soft is something that you thought about, or whether as you were making these, or whether it was just more kind of an impulse to have them share the space in the way that they do.
Well, actually, this was part of the question I didn't answer before, and the moving from flat to 3D. They get more rigid. The paintings have lots of curves in them.
Yeah.
The curves are a lot harder to deal with when you're building that paper. So the 3D pieces, and in order for things to actually hold together, those laws of physics actually are a problem. They're not good. I could draw whatever I wanted to draw, and it wasn't going to fall off the page. But the edges needed to come together.
Yeah.
So they end up being much more rigid. So the drawing of the curves that you see in all of it is there for two reasons. One, to create an additional layer of illusion, but also to soften. To soften and relate back to that circular grid that was used in the beginning.
Nice. So you sort of addressed my last two questions already, but I'm going to ask them nonetheless in case there was something you wanted to say about them, and then we'll go from there. So was there anything that you haven't addressed yet that really surprised you as you were creating this body of work? And apart from the paper, what didn't work, and how did you have to pivot when putting this show together? Did you have ideas that just simply had to fall by the wayside to get you where you are?
There was like 6 months of ideas that just had to go by the wayside. But once I got to this, once I found the paper, and I have to thank my son, who's back here, for coming into the studio in January when I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. And he said, why don't you just try and build sections of the paintings? And I was like, well, I think I thought to do that at some point and totally lost track.
There you go.
As soon as that, everything from that point on, as soon as I found the paper and my magical 45-degree cutter, everything really, I didn't have to throw that much away. I mean, I don't know, you might think I could have eliminated some.
No.
But I think there was just a lot of work. And then the color, the color all happened. I mean, it's in response to the paintings too. But I didn't anticipate the looking into these objects and seeing the hidden mirrory reflective 3D stuff going on as I set out to do this.
So I'm ready to open it up to questions, unless there was something you feel like we haven't covered yet that you were very excited to share.
Not that I can.
Okay. Questions for Carrie?
Maybe I missed it, but and if I did, forgive me. But what kind of paper is it?
It's Strathmore 500 series multimedia paper.
That's why it's such a good.
And it's almost, it's really the same thickness as a matte wood, but it has a different quality.
Yeah. And then, how did you glue the edges?
That was the other wonderful thing. I got one of those little bottles with this really needle nose squirter thing on it. It's beautiful, albeit wiggly because it shapes so much lines.
And finally, what kind of paint did you use?
It's all golden fluid acrylic for the most part.
Even the paper pieces, they're not any wash.
Nope. Matte, super matte medium mixed with the paint. Also golden. Anyone from golden?
Could you talk a little bit about the light that you built into them? You talked a little bit about the luminous quality, but I'm so struck by that mysterious, there's another dimension that you built in here. And did it just sort of emerge as you were working on them?
Yeah, but nothing like when it got in here with real lights. That was pretty fun because, I mean, it was definitely there and it was all intentional. but there's only one piece that actually has an opening that allows light to come in. So the rest of it is just reflecting from whatever's going on in the room off the reflective films that are inside.
It's really beautiful.
Thank you.
I was kind of interested when I was looking at some of the patterning on the cylinders and things, like the stripes, that it's not really using perspective. Would you call that isometric with the way you're feeling?
If you would, I would.
I mean, is that a conscious part of keeping it in the geometry realm rather than the pictorial illusion realm?
Well, it's part of the illusion realm because they are not, the perspective in the cylinders is really just related to that one shape. And
but it goes consistently as a pattern.
yes.
Rather than the illusion of that perspective would do. So it seems geometrical to me, which I found really interesting. You know, that it wasn't an illusion, but it was and it wasn't. It was
Right, right. I mean, you know, it's like the drawing exercise, it's shading. Is that isometric?
Isometric
You know, when you-
never meets a point.
What?
Isometric never meets a vanishing.
Oh, okay, yes. Yes. Thank you.
You're welcome. My pleasure. I use it.
It's art.
In other words, it's not
No.
affected by a point.
Correct. Drawing 101.
So do you have like a plan of how they're going to be constructed before you actually construct them and then draw them? Like some of the ones that you can look into when you see the drawing side?
Yes.
So it's drawn.
So I'll
when it's
build it,
pieces,
and I won't actually glue it together. I'll
Okay.
just put it together
and then you draw it.
and then I'll go, okay, maybe I want to do a drawing on this side and a reflection on the other side and
then
play around with it once it's built. Except for, I mean, this one I have more planned.
I don't have a question as much as a comment. I've seen your work for many years, and I'm really just so impressed with how thoughtful and how much you pull in sacred geometry with the circles, drawn over the circles, and how somehow that geometry in art is not as prevalent or understood as you have brought it to the forefront. And so as a foundations instructor, it's so nice to see the basics of drawing and perspective and isometrics and just how things work in science, nature, and art rolled all into the show. It's really beautiful.
Thanks.
Really beautiful.